Episode 4. So far, everyone seems to think that awkward is awesome. Bonus for me, so let's keep it going. So finally in the shop, going to be working on the little blue Toyota. Tell you guys a little bit about that thing. Bought it 4 or 5 years ago from a buddy. I think I gave him $300 for it. Basically saved it from the scrapyard. Didn't run. Windows were smashed out of it. It was wrecked in the front end. Probably should have went to the scrapyard. But I drug it out of there, got it running, fixed the sheet metal the best I could, lowered it down, and I drove it like that with the original 400,000 mile 20R for a summer, and it eventually threw a rod on me on my way to work. So I built a 92 22RE drivetrain for it, put it in there, drove it for another 2 years. And then I just got bored with it, pulled it in a few months ago, and cut it into a million pieces. But I'll give you guys a look around on this thing, on where we're at with it, what all needs done with it. See if I got some pictures through the years of this thing I'll post, and you can kind of see where it's been and where we're heading with it, and get to work on it. So here's the frame. It is Z'd front and rear. If you don't know what that is, instead of, normally you would put a notch right over top of the axle. It would kind of just hump up right there so the axle could come up a little higher. Instead of doing that, I Z'd the whole back of the frame. I did it for a couple of reasons. One, just because I've never done it. I seen it in mini trucking years ago. I think it was on a Chevy Love. No, I just kind of wanted to do it. Another reason is you don't have to have a hole in your bed floor. Obviously, if you're not body dropping the truck, you'd still have to body drop the bed to drop it back down. But being that I was body dropping this truck, it really wasn't any extra work. So now I have a completely smooth bed floor, bolted right back down, and the Z was free. And I did the same to the front. Reason I did that is on these Toyotas, that front engine cross member, it hangs down a few inches lower than the frame. A lot of guys will just section it and raise it. But I already had this thing completely stripped down, so I just Z'd the front. And pie cut these stock control arms. The fronts are welded back up, front of the arms. The rears still need done. And I did that because these ball joints, when you go so low on these Toyotas, the ball joints don't have enough angle in them, and they will bind up, hold the front of the truck up. So you just put those 4 cuts in it, lay the truck down, and they'll just kind of open up like they did there. You just weld them back. The rear is just a typical 4-link, nothing special. Bag behind the axle, and stock fuel tank is relocated. And this is what we'll be working on today. Getting the front air brackets all welded in, everything cut out. So I'll show you around the rest of the truck real quick. Here's the 22RE out of the 92 with a 5-speed. It's got a LCE cam, some headwork, bigger injectors, header, aftermarket clutch. So it moved this truck pretty decent. Big improvement over the stock 20R with 400,000 miles on it when I got the truck. That engine, it had so much blow by, I had to take the rubber hose off the PCV valve and run it out of a rust hole in the fender, because so much blow by was coming in the rust holes of the floor pan of this thing. It would just choke you to death. And that 4-speed that was in it, it liked to jump out of 4th gear. So I actually had a bungee cord attached to the bench seat. Once I got in 4th gear, I'd wrap that bungee cord around the shifter back to the seat to hold it in gear so I could actually drive on the highway. And I think pretty much everybody hated this truck except me. Everyone hated riding in it. It broke down pretty much every time I drove it, but I loved it. It was always an adventure. But that factory engine, eventually it threw a rod on my way into work one day, and then I built this engine. So as you can see, the body is not great, but I don't care. I love this thing. I care about being low, not about looking good. When I got the truck, it was hit in the passenger front corner, and I did not have a 2-wheel drive fender, but I had a 4-wheel drive one. The 4-wheel drives have big fender flares from the factory, so I couldn't just use it. So I just kind of scabbed in the front section there and made it work. The hood, which is under there, not much left of it, but it was buckled. I straightened that thing out the best I could and rolled it. The cab, the floor pan, factory floor pan, was so rusted out, when you would sit on the bench seat, it would basically fall through the floor. So my fix for almost 2 years was I took ratchet straps from the corner of the bench seat where it would sit and ran them up to these bolt holes here where the seat belt's attached. So on both sides I'd have a ratchet strap on an angle from the top down to that bottom corner. And that was basically what held you in the truck, and I drove everywhere like that. But now I built my own firewall, floor pan, back cab wall. It's a 3-inch body drop. And I bead rolled all of this with my homemade bead roller. And this is where we're at with it. Alright, so back at the front of this, which is where we will be working. If you're not familiar with Toyotas or mini trucks in general, these typically, from the factory, they have a torsion bar which would run from the bottom of the control arm there back to the factory cross member, which that's not the factory one, I made this one. But that's what typically would hold the weight of the vehicle. I removed all that, and we'll be putting airbags on the front. I have one kind of test fit in there just to make sure it was going to fit and get an idea of what all needs cut out. That's a Slam Specialty RE7, and I'll get it jacked up, show you what we're working with and what needs cut out, what needs done, and go from there. So I got those upper ball joints popped, upper control arms are pulled off, gives you a little more room to work, gives you a better view of what needs cut out of here. Basically, anything that protrudes from the frame and that airbag could possibly rub on is coming out of there. And you also want that bag to sit as close to the frame as you can. So obviously all this needs to come out. These were just the factory mounts for the bump stops. And this is actually the mount, these two nuts for the upper control arm. So I'm gonna cut across this line here, leave as much of this intact for now as I can. And I may have to fine tune it later, but I'll just be using a cutoff wheel and a grinder and get to work and get that all cut out. I'll give you a look at it once I'm done. Alright, so we got it all cut out of there. Came out in about a dozen pieces, but whatever you gotta do to get it cut out of there. And this is roughly what you should end up with. I'll go back with a grinding wheel, then a flap disc, and get this all cleaned up and then jump to the other side. Here we are, both sides are cut out, cleaned up. There's about what you want. Front brackets, these would be the uppers, lowers. I got a couple different size gussets, wasn't sure exactly what I was going to need. How this will end up, probably have to cut these brackets down a little shorter, but they will go somewhere along the lines right here, and they will be up at a upward angle a little bit, and then gusseted. And the lower plate will sit on the lower control arm somewhere. And what you want is those bags, they compress. I think that one at RE7, it compresses to about 3 inches. So you want your upper and lower plate to sit parallel, meaning you can imagine when this lower control arm comes up, it is going to swing upward. You want this plate sitting even, just 3 inches lower, but at the same angle as your upper plate. So I'm going to test fit that bag, make sure I don't need any more cutting, and start getting these plates welded in. Okay, so I went ahead and threw the control arms, wheels back on this thing, got it laying on the ground. I did that just so I can do some test fitting, some measurements, make sure this thing is going to lay out. Nothing more embarrassing than a bag truck that doesn't lay out. We all know somebody with one. Don't be that guy. So to show you real quick how I like to set up the front end. Doesn't mean it's the right way or the only way. It's just how I like to do it. So I got it laying flat on the ground. Throw a angle finder on that lower control arm. It is about at 35 degrees. So I'll weld in the upper plate at that angle. And if you remember, these bags compress to about 3 inches. See if I can do this with one hand. I have about 4 inches there. So that'll give me a little bit of play where I can angle that lower plate to match the 35 degrees I'm gonna set the upper plate at. And I bolted the upper plate to this bag. And ideally you want about a finger width gap around this bag everywhere from rubbing. So what I like to do is just kind of mark it, and I will unbolt that bag, and I'll give myself about 1 inch, and I will cut the rest of this off. That way that bag is sitting inboard as close as I can get it. And the reason you want that is the farther inward it sits, the more lift you'll get. So I'll get this all handled and show you what I got. here it is all tore apart again. What I like to do, I measured and marked the center of the frame and the center of that bag plate. And put my angle finder on there and line up the two center marks. You will find your angle, which this was 35 is what that lower control arm is when we're laid out. So I will set this to 35, tack it in place, and ultimately all this will be boxed in. Have some gussets on there. So I'll drag the welder out, get that tacked up, and once it's in place, I'll throw that bag back in, throw the control arm back on there, and just test fit everything, make sure it's good to go.